Joe and Tell. Today we're going to be taking a look at the ELAC Uni-Fi reference. And the question is it worthy of that name reference? Let's find out. So I know a lot of the folks that are watching this are really trying to make buying decisions. They want to know, is this worth it? Are they much better than the ELAC Uni-Fi 2.0s or even the old ELAC UB5s, the originals? You might also want to know how these compare to other speakers in the same price range. Now, I know that people want a definitive answer, and the truth is, anybody who has had some experience with speakers and audio in general will tell you that there's so much interaction between the speaker and the room that it's really hard to tell the two apart. I've just moved into a new location, and so the room acoustics here are much different than what I'm used to. And so I have to be able to separate those two out. A set of speakers can sound great in one room and not so good in another, and vice versa. Every room is a little bit different. So just know that, but also know that there is some consistency. A good speaker will probably sound good in most rooms. A bad speaker is probably not going to outperform a good speaker in most rooms. You know what I mean? So with that out of the way, I've been listening to these ELAC Uni-Fi reference. Andrew Jones, you did it again, my friend. Now, these are at a much higher price point than the original UB5. So the original UB5s, they were around that $500 price point, but often they would go on sale for about $350 US. And the ELAC Uni-Fi 2.0s are $699, so significantly more expensive. These are even more expensive than those, coming at around $1,000. Now for the floor standards, they're coming in at around $1,000 each. In this video, I'm also taking a look at the center channel speaker. If you're planning to use this in a home theater situation, you're gonna wanna look at that. Just to get some specs out of the way, the floor standards are 3 5¼ inch drivers, a 4-inch mid-range, and a 1-inch soft dome tweeter. The bookshelf speakers are 6.5s with the same mid-range and tweeter setup. The center channel consists of 2 5¼ inch and the same mid-range and tweeter setup. So one thing that's different about the Uni-Fi reference, as well as the debut reference, is that they're front ported. And so it has a dual flared front slotted port here. And one thing that's interesting, the floor standards actually have ports on the back as well. I wasn't sure how that would affect things, so I had to call up Andrew Jones and said, hey, so what was the thinking behind this? How do you think this will affect the sound? And overall, I think what the takeaway is that when it comes to bass, having bass coming from different locations can actually help with some of the issues with room modes. Now, when they're that close, it's not as effective as when you have subs in many different locations, but the good thing is that it's not going to affect it in a negative way. If you're curious about what those ports are doing, they're actually all tuned to the same frequency. So even though the bottom port looks a lot different, still the same tuning frequency. The one I got was the one that was walnut and the white front with the gray grill. I think it looks fantastic. The silver rim around the speakers, these speakers look awesome. So the drivers are aluminum, but they have this matte black finish. Oh man, these look awesome. So the original UB5s were one of the first speakers I ever purchased that were a little bit more expensive than what I used to have. And so I've been an ELAC fan for a long time. And since then, they've had the Uni-Fi 2.0s, they've had the debut reference, things like that. All very good speakers, but they lack some of that magic that the original UB5s had, which to me had a lot to do with the value proposition of how much it was versus the performance I was getting out of them. Now, they weren't outperforming stuff that was 3-4 times the price, maybe on par with some of those, but at the same time, they had their flaws. One of the main flaws was that the bass response on it was excellent, but the high frequencies, they definitely were down a few decibels, so you couldn't hear those high frequencies. The crispness, if you wanted clarity, those weren't really the speakers for you. So that's not to say that those were bad speakers. It's just that the mid-range was excellent. The bass was more than you expected. It's just that the highs were a little bit lacking. Now, with the Uni-Fi 2.0s, Andrew Jones bumped the treble up a little bit. And so you'd expect, like, all right, well, there it is. Problem solved. Everything's perfect. But there were a few issues. First thing is that I didn't love the look of those. They didn't have a magnetic grill, which is kind of surprising at the price of $699. These, fortunately, thank you guys, they do have a magnetic grill. I made fun of them on the last one for not having magnetic grills. Here they are, works. The other thing about the sound of the Uni-Fi 2.0s is that the treble was elevated, but there was something about it that I found a little bit harsh. And from more testing, I was able to find with the help of some other folks, you guys know who you are, that there was kind of an issue where the ring around the mid-range speaker could kind of resonate and make some nasty resonance. It's a weird sound. It's hard to explain, but only at pretty loud volumes. I didn't find it immediately, but I think that was what I was hearing when I said that it sounded a little bit harsh to me. It was that sound. And so I did some testing on these, and fortunately, at very loud volumes, I heard none of that. I did sweep tests up and down, and I didn't hear any issues. The bass I found was okay. I mean, the measurements say they go down to as far down as they claim, which is around 40 hertz, which is pretty good for a speaker this size. Yeah, nothing to complain about. It's just that I felt like the old UB5s had more bass. And the same thing with the 2.0s. I felt the originals had more bass than those. And I think what's actually happening is that the fact that they didn't have that much treble, the originals, I would turn it up louder, which means that it had more bass. And so I think it's more of a psychoacoustic trick rather than the speaker actually having less bass. It's kind of tricky because the measurements will tell you that these have equal or maybe slightly more bass, but when you're listening, because you're going to turn it up louder to hear voices and things like that at a volume that you want, that means you're also turning up the bass. The other thing is, when I spoke with Andrew Jones, he said, yeah, well, these have cleaner bass, and a lot of times when you have cleaner bass, it doesn't sound as pronounced. You won't notice it as much. I'm not sure how much there is to that, but I figure I'll let you guys know. I did try these with a sub, and I can say that if I have a sub taking over from 40 hertz and below, a sub can really add to the overall experience. There's nothing else to say. If you're planning on using these as floor standards with no sub, yeah, I think you'll have an enjoyable experience. But if you were to add a sub, it just takes it to another level. The connectors on the back, you have some dual 5-way binding posts, and these are very different. They look nice, they look high-end, and it's a finish that I've never seen on some connectors on the back of these. It kind of made me wonder how conductive that material is, but I'm not even gonna second guess that because I assume that if it affected it negatively, they probably wouldn't use it. These guys are hardcore engineers over here at ELAC. They're not playing around when it comes to stuff like that just for looks. Regarding the floor standards, I also was curious as to why they didn't have 6.5s in the floor standards and maybe a center channel with 6.5s. And I think that has to do with maybe the fact that they look too big. I'm not sure the exact reason, but it's kind of interesting. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be asking for that. Now, how many people would have bought it and paid more? Who knows? That's for them to decide. I'm sure you guys want to know how it sounds. And you guys know that I do measurements, so that allows me to kind of cheat because it gives me an idea if what I'm telling you guys is actually true. And so here's the bottom line. Reference, these are definitely what I would consider the reference line for the Uni-Fi series. I mean, the frequency response is amazing, and how it translates to the actual sound that you hear, the sound that I hear, especially in this room. I'm in a 20 by 20 space, and the imaging is amazing. Very, very excellent imaging. The width and how picky it is as far as where I'm sitting. I'm a little bit off center here in this chair, and it still sounds very good. Now, if I go to the center, of course, it gets better, but it's not picky like some other speakers where if you're slightly off center, it's just gonna screw up the whole soundstage. Not with these. It's wide, the image is very strong, which is what you expect from concentric drivers like these. So if you're interested in the concentric design, I go into that in my original UB5 video, as well as my Uni-Fi 2.0 video. I also have an interview with Andrew Jones where he talks a little bit about that, so make sure to check those out. If you just want the short and sweet answer, the fact that the tweeter is in the middle of the mid-range means that the sound is coming from the exact same location, and so that makes them blend better, and it makes it sound better when you're above or below or to the side of the speaker. It sounds a little bit more consistent than when the mid-range is here and the tweeter is here, or if it's a woofer and a tweeter, it starts to act weird once you start moving off axis. A concentric design addresses those issues. Now, as far as the tonality, which is one of the most important things to me, which is basically how accurate is this speaker? Is it representing the music that's coming in? Is it spitting it out in the same way as it came in? And I would have to say, based on what I hear and the frequency response, the answer is yes. I mean, The frequency is very flat. I even called Andrew Jones and said, hey, congratulations, because finally you have a speaker that measures flat. You know, he kind of laughed. I haven't really seen a speaker measure like this. Like this flat. I mean, I've seen speakers that come pretty close. But usually, in order to see something like this, you're starting to get into the active speaker territory. Stuff that's using DSP, digital signal processing, to really flatten out and EQ that response. So he's able to do that with passive speakers. And the reason is they have a crazy crossover in here. They invited me to open it up to show you guys. And so here it is. Take a look at this. For you guys who are into DIY, you can take a look at the components and see he put in some work to make sure that this is the response that you would expect from a high quality speaker. They're 85 decibel sensitivity and a 6 ohm nominal impedance. What does that mean? It means that you can drive these with most modern amplifiers. If you have a really old school amplifier, or maybe some tube amp or something like that that can't run maybe 4 ohms, maybe it might have an issue with 6 ohms, well, be careful. But I mean, most common receivers, AVRs, will be able to handle these no problem. So regarding the 85 decibel sensitivity, not super sensitive. Same with the old ELAC Uni-Fis. The 2.0s were the same way. But one thing is that they do measure them accurately. So other speakers with higher sensitivity ratings, actually, they're not really that high. But one thing I would say is these are not the most efficient speakers, and it's because they got that bass response with the extension, and they're kind of sacrificing a little bit of the sensitivity. So you may want a more powerful amplifier if you plan on using these to the maximum capacity, maximum ability of 140 watts, I think is the rating on these. So if you want to play them extremely loud, or if you want to play them with an amplifier that doesn't have a ton of power, maybe these aren't the right speakers. But if you have a decent amount, 100 watts is more than enough in my opinion for most scenarios. Now, another question I know a lot of people are gonna have is, should I get the floor standards or the bookshelf speakers? One thing I always tell people is keep in mind that when you get bookshelf speakers, if you want them to sound their best, you're gonna need to put them on speaker stands. So whatever space you thought you would have saved by not having anything below them, it's kind of nullified by the fact that you have to actually get speaker stands. Now, if you're planning on putting them onto something, well, you know, then your answer is the bookshelves, right? But if you have the choice between the two, it's a really tough decision because the floor standards are double the price. What I would say is the 6.5 on the bookshelf speaker, really, to me, it makes a difference. And here's what I mean that the room makes such a difference, because when I'm testing out the bookshelf speakers, those should have around the same frequency response. But in my room, exactly where they were placed, they had more bass. That is because where they're at in my room, I had them on top of the other speakers. So maybe because of the distance from the ceiling, it interacted with the room in a different way. And so it might not be in every situation, but I'm comfortable saying that the bookshelf speakers will perform very close to how these floor standards are performing. Usually what you can expect when you have more drivers, even though they're smaller drivers, is that it's a little bit more efficient. You get to play them a little bit louder. But I think if you're using this with a home theater and you're using a subwoofer, I'm not sure that you're gonna notice a huge difference. Yeah, I have a feeling that the 6.5s are really where it's at. That's the value proposition. Now, if you love the way these floor standards look with the 3 speakers, I can't blame you. They do look awesome. In a future video, I will have a binaural sound demo for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. Maybe I'll compare the floor standards to the bookshelves. Let me know if you're interested in that. So what would I say? I would say that these definitely have what it takes to have that reference sound. Everybody has a different budget of what they think is expensive or not expensive. And I would say that I'll leave it to you. But with regards to how these perform relative to other speakers in their price range, I think they're reference quality. They deserve that badge because of how they respond, their frequency response, how they sound off axis. These speakers perform very well. They also look awesome, so that's helpful also. We all have to look at the speakers. We want the speakers to look nice. These look nice in my opinion. What can I say? The ELAC guys did it again. I think that these are the best sounding Uni-Fi speakers that I've ever heard. And they might actually be the best ELAC speakers that I've heard. I haven't heard the highest end stuff, but I think so. I think I'm gonna have to stick with that. For the folks who want to know if this is going to be good for home theater or 2-channel audio, I would say for 2-channel, I would say that they're very good. I would want them to have more bass. If you're going to do 2-channel, consider 2.1, where you can have frequencies below 40 hertz getting taken care of by a sub. If you're not into that and you just want to use them as floor standing speakers, well, you may want some bigger speakers that can actually get down to 20 hertz if you're adamant about not having a sub. If you're using these for home theater, I think that the accurate frequency response is going to be excellent in many situations, especially if you pair that with a good receiver that's going to do some EQing and kind of tuning these to the best of their ability. You want to start off with good sounding speakers to begin with, and I think that these are it. I'll leave my Amazon affiliate link down below if you're interested in purchasing these. Anyway, if you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Take care. Bye-bye. The mid-range comes with 5 2 1/4s and the same mid-range and tweeter setup.